afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Do Good to Lead Well Through Crisis webinar series. My name is Craig Dowden, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you here this afternoon. I'm really excited about this upcoming conversation. So many fantastic insights, and I could talk to Dr. Cameron for hours. Just so much rich research and leadership practice and personal practice that we can learn. For those of you who are returning members who have been to previous VIP sessions, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. For those of you who are new, welcome. It's really awesome to have you to be a part of this conversation. Just taking a moment to provide the context. The reason I started this webinar series is that in my work as an executive coach, keynote speaker, I've had the profound privilege of speaking with international thought leaders, top CEOs like Kim in my day-to-day practice. Just so fortunate. I learned so much, and what I wanted to do before the publication of my first book was open up that dialogue and that community so we could have a conversation and learn from each other. And then last year, when COVID-19 came upon us, again, wanted to relaunch, rebrand, if you will, that conversation. And so over the last year and a half, I've interviewed over 70 CEOs, best-selling authors, TED speakers, just global experts that we can learn from, so that as we navigate through the quote-unquote new normal and think about how we can be more resilient, how we can build deeper and more trusting relationships, we can gain insight from their wisdom, their research, and their experiences. So I cannot be happier to welcome Dr. Kim Cameron. So he is the co-founder of the Center for Positive Organizations out of the University of Michigan. He's the William Russell Kelly Professor of Management and Organizations at the Ross School of Business, as well as Professor of Higher Education at the School of Education. He's written, his work has been written in over 100 scientific articles, well over 130. He's published 15 books, which is, they're all incredible. I would highly encourage you to check them out, including his latest, Positively Energizing Leadership. One of the things that I have to say that I admire most about Kim is that above and beyond his extraordinary results and achievements professionally, like, he just emulates everything that he's about to talk about. And just to show you, I got to put these on camera so you can see. I've had his books, every single one. I'd show you the latest, but I got the e-version. And here's a fun one. So to show you how long, that's the initial the Positive Organizational Scholarship, so that I've had. And if I flip it open, you'll see lots of highlights. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Kim. And he's joining us from the Cardiovascular Center at University of Michigan. So found a way, again, just such a great gesture. So thank you.
So Craig, the reason I'm in the Cardiovascular Center is my heart's beating so fast because I have a privilege of being on your on your show.
The pleasure is all ours, and Kim has kindly agreed to take questions from the live audience. So I know, please take this opportunity to ask questions, learn more, and what I love about Kim too, like, share some of your concerns or skepticisms about, well, hey, does this really work, or how can we make this work? It's just such a rich dialogue. So perhaps you can start by what interested you, motivated you to want to write this particular book? I think it's so powerful.
Well, thanks, Craig. Actually, I'll give a little bit more preface that's more serious. I'm in the Cardiovascular Center at the University of Michigan because they're a representative, I think, of almost all really good healthcare systems around the world, and that is COVID has just decimated these healthcare organizations. Everybody's lost big dollars, big amounts of dollars. Staff members are burned out. People are using this as an excuse to retire early, to leave healthcare, which then puts much more burden on the people who stay. Patients, there are more patients than ever, and it's nonstop. They keep coming. Normally, when you're a patient in a hospital or in a physician clinic or something, those are not your best moods. I mean, you're not the most happy you've ever been. So they're dealing with more difficult situations than ever before. And the head of the cardiovascular system at the University of Michigan. It's called Michigan Medicine. Is a very savvy guy, and he's decided that one of the ways to try to help energize, uplift, foster more well-being, and perform better. I mean, they have to perform better. They have to earn more money, for heaven's sake. Revenues have to go up. One of the best ways to do that is focusing on positive practices and creating a positive organization, fostering an abundance culture as opposed to a deficit culture, and so on. So I had a meeting with him just before this, and that's why, and I couldn't make it back to my office in time, so that's why I'm in his space. This book, Craig, thanks for the chance to talk about it. It's called Positively Energizing Leadership. In fact, I might even have, I'll see if I have a copy in my briefcase. I do, my God.
Hey, that's awesome.
The reason I wrote this book, it's really a follow-up to the ones you have called Positive Leadership. It's sort of the third in a series, and maybe the last in the series. This book was written because there are some findings in research that just have never been published. They're just not available. And I just felt like it was crucial that we have this available in the public domain. And so what are those findings? They've kind of emerged over a period of about 20 years. One of them is that there is something typical of all living systems. Everything alive has something in common, have many things in common, but one of those things in common is called an inclination toward the heliotropic effect. What in the world is that? Well, turns out every living system, and research has been done from single cell organisms, complex human systems, every living system has a tendency toward the light and away from dark, or toward positive energy and away from negative energy. In nature, the sun is the source of positive energy. It's the life-giving force. So photosynthesis happens only in the presence of light. Life occurs. So most accurately defined, the heliotropic effect is every living system has a tendency toward that which is life-giving and away from that which is life-depleting. That makes sense. I mean, every living system has a tendency toward that which produces, enhances, gives life, and avoids that which endangers or detracts from life. Now, if that's true, that has big implications for how we rear our children, how we treat our employees, what kind of relationships we form with our friends and colleagues, and so on. So I wanted to share the evidence that the heliotropic effect exists. And the reason for that is we tend, especially I'm thinking now, I'm sitting in this cardiovascular center, we tend to constantly be barraged by problems, issues, difficulties. And we get consumed in that victim mentality. That's what they're calling it. In fact, they're talking about, we got to change your mentality from being victims to victors. Which I kind of like that notion. But anyway, so what we have to do essentially is unlock the tendency in all human beings toward the positive. And in fact, I want to just share a study or two that highlights that point number one. There are 3 points. Point number one is the heliotropic effect exists. So this study has been replicated many times, but here's an example of a study. So in this study, they took children ages 3 months to 8 months, long before they learn language, long before they have any kind of civilized socialization. Have the child watch a puppet show for approximately 20 seconds or 30 seconds. So they see a puppet walk across the stage, tries to climb a hill, tries to open a box. Then you have 2 other puppets. One puppet tries to help, encourage, support. The other tries to hinder, Puts a block up, you can't make it up the hill. Jumps on the box, you can't open the box. Then after 20 seconds or so, you simply bring these two puppets out, put it in front of the child, and the child can select whichever puppet he or she wants to play with or wants to own or have. More than 90% of the time, children select the puppet that tries to help rather than tries to hurt. And the conclusion of the study is from the time you were born, or at least 3 months old, there is an inherent inclination toward the positive, toward virtuousness, toward kindness. Another study takes children at age 19 months. Now, I didn't know this, but 19 months apparently is the peak. It's the most likely time that a child will get aggressive or show a temper tantrum when he or she can't get what they want. So 19 months, people are going to go more crazy than they will ever at another time. I didn't know that. So they took 19-month-old children, put them in the following experimental condition. So the child is on the floor. In front of the child is a tray. Have an adult who is blocked from being near the child by a fence or a pillar or a desk. The adult drops a fruit treat in the tray out of his or her reach. Can't reach it, but it's dropped in the tray. And the question is, what will the child do with that fruit treat? Now, there are 2 or 3 conditions. One condition, the adult reaches for it, obviously wants it, but can't reach it. The second condition is the adult doesn't care or just looks, doesn't indicate a desire for it. Large percentage of the time, by far a large majority of the time, a 19-month-old child, if the adult reaches for the treat, will give the treat to the adult. The most interesting part of that study is another one of the conditions is they had the child miss lunch. Now they're hungry. Didn't eat at noon. Now it's 2 o'clock, and they're used to having eaten. And if they don't get what they want, this is the time they have a temper tantrum. Didn't change at all. A large majority of the children still, even though they're hungry, hand that fruit treat. When the adult does not reach for it, then most of the time, only 3% of the time, will the child hand it to the adult. And the conclusion of that study is children, when they're very young, before they get socialized or learn their way away from the heliotropic effect, have this tendency to go to the positive, toward virtuousness. And so the second factor that I wanted to make certain we published in this book is all of the findings that say that virtuous actions lead to positive, life-giving energy. That is gratitude, expressing gratitude, generosity, kindness, integrity, charity, benevolence, and so on. Not only being the recipient of that, but expressing those virtues create positive energy. And again, there's a whole bunch of studies that illustrate that that's the case. I mean, we have lots and lots of interventions in organizations. We simply suggested organizations do things like have all the employees keep a gratitude journal. I mean, 5 minutes before you go to bed tonight, just write down the 3 best things that happened to you today, or 3 things for which you're grateful. Or one executive in the FBI, for example, learned about this. She had one of her walls on her office was facing a big open area, and it was a glass wall. On the outside of that wall, she simply put at the very top, gratitude wall. That was all. She just wrote gratitude wall. By the end of the day, there were 4 or 5 people who had come up and written things on that wall. By the end of the week, it was completely filled. And most interestingly, there were 3 or 4 other gratitude walls that emerged in FBI headquarters. I mean, small things, those are tiny things. But what's interesting is lots of research on gratitude talks about the impact it has on cognitive, emotional, relational performance, and so on. So that, anyway, so that's an example, a very tiny example of a virtuous activity that in fact turns around the kinds of things we worry about, like relationships and well-being and health, physical health and so on. Okay. Those in turn, virtuousness leads to positive energy. In fact, I need to tell you one more study. So one of the major issues, appropriately so, that we're facing has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a big deal. In fact, it's sort of risen to the #1 issue in almost every organization I know. Well, there was a study done in which the authors did a meta-analysis. What that means is they take a whole bunch of studies, look at the data sets, kind of put them together, and then draw a conclusion of all these studies together. In this particular study, they had 700 studies of essentially diversity, equity, inclusion. Well, what they discovered is that there are really two major strategies for fostering, enabling, improving diversity, equity, inclusion. Strategy #1, we might call a demographic strategy. So we need to make sure there's a representative of especially underrepresented groups in our top management team or in the group we get together or in positions of responsibility and so on. So one Asian, one Black, one trans, one LGBT, one female, and so on. That's a common strategy. A second strategy is called a training strategy. That is unbiased assumptions that we carry, or white or some group supremacy, or all those kinds of things, fragility, and so on and so on. So unconscious bias training, essentially. The result of this meta-analysis was that not only did those two strategies not help in most circumstances, but in some cases they were harmful. It got worse. Holy cow. Well, if they don't work, what does? My prescription is virtuous activity. That is, human beings cannot for long react negatively to virtue. Kindness, generosity, integrity, compassion, love, and so on. Maybe it can for a while, but not over time. So a more appropriate strategy is that sort of second bucket I'm talking about, and that is enabling, fostering, institutionalizing virtuous behaviors in an organization. All right, that leads to the third major finding I wanted to make sure we talked about in this book, and that is positive energy fostered by, created by virtuous activity produces bottom line performance in organizations. I mean, productivity, profitability, quality, and so on. See, the #1 objection I hear from executives, engineers, lawyers, medical doctors, and so on is, Cameron, this positive stuff is so soupy, syrupy, saccharine sweet, fluffy. I mean, oh goodness, it's a feel-good side trip, but I don't I don't have time for this. I mean, I got outcomes I got to produce. I got bottom line performance I'm held accountable for. If you could actually show me how that pays off, how it's meaningful to me, I might pay attention. But otherwise, look, don't bother me with this. So my research for the last 20 years has asked that question: is there bottom line performance that occurs, can be produced, causal relationship can be produced by positive practices? And the answer is unequivocally yes. So there are many, many studies over the last 20 years, as you might expect, that show that when an organization implements positive practices, we can measure that, and when scores go up, profitability goes up substantially. I have one study where it was 4 times industry average, just in profitability. Productivity goes up, almost whatever way you measure productivity. Quality goes up, fewer errors, less waste. People are more efficient. Innovation goes up. People feel safe that they can actually be creative and do interesting things and go beyond the requirement. Customer satisfaction, customer loyalty, customer retention goes up, and employee well-being, employee satisfaction, employee engagement goes up. I mean, you're held accountable for those factors. And sure enough, that's what the book is about. So in the book, there's making this case, plus then the obvious questions arise. Okay, well, if I'm going to capitalize on positive energy, how do I recognize what are the attributes of positively energizing leaders? So there's a chapter on that after. It's a result of about 600 interviews with positive energizers. Another question is, well, how do you develop it? And there's a chapter on how you help foster, enable, create positive energy and energizing, energizers. There's a chapter on yeah buts. Yeah, but Cameron. So I try to address the exceptions and so on. So anyway, that's the purpose. I'm going on and on and on, Greg, and your questions are great, and you've got lots more of them. But that's the whole point of this book, is trying to make the case that this matters a lot.
Well, and I love that, and I love how you create space for the counter. I think that's so wonderful. That and again in the book, it's just so great to highlight those counter positions, and then you walk through and say, hey, here's what our rationale is. These are things for you to think about, and it's a very inclusive conversation. I've got lots of questions, which I'm not surprised. So I will do everything I can to get through them all. So had a great question from Tara, who said, love the label virtuous. So can you share a little bit more about what inspired you to talk about, frame it in a virtuous manner, share more about like what's that definition, how can we inspire more virtuousness in ourselves and others? So there was lots of enthusiasm around that term.
It's a great question, and more complex than I can answer probably will, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I got involved in all this because I was studying organizations that were downsizing, cutting budget, retrenching, laying people off, and so on. The results of that research over about 10 years was that organizations that downsize deteriorate in performance between 80 and 90% of the time. Almost all organizations, when they downsize, will go south in terms of performance. However, between 10 and 15% of organizations flourished after downsizing. Performance went way up. So the question became, well, what's the difference? I mean, how do you explain those few organizations that flourished versus everybody who didn't? Well, the answer, I didn't have data. The answer became very clear to me, and that is that they were representing what I referred to at the time as virtuous practices, kindness, gratitude. They were helping people as opposed to, escorting them out the door, trying to make certain that they found other employment and so on and so on. Well, one of the attributes that I gave a talk on that at a national conference. Somebody called me up and said, are you aware that there's a foundation that's funding research on forgiveness? And that's one of the attributes you were talking about, is forgiving the pain that's caused by the organization's actions and so on. So I applied for a research grant, got a research grant to study forgiveness in organizations. It turns out the funding agency said, you're the only non-psychologist that we've funded, because we're interested in how this plays out in an organization as opposed to just my forgiving you. Yeah. Well, I never believed, and sure enough, I discovered that this is true empirically. I never believed that forgiveness by itself predicts almost anything. But in combination with generosity and charity and kindness and gratitude and so on, that becomes a very powerful predictor of these outcomes that we're talking about. So that's why I use the word virtuous. What I'm trying to do is put together a whole bunch of virtues. That is, a virtue is essentially the best of the human condition, the highest aspirations we have for ourselves is a virtuous state. Now, Aristotle and Plato and other those kinds of things have various definitions. Eudaimonism is one, that is something that's virtuous for its own sake. You don't need anything else. I don't need payback to be kind to somebody. In fact, if I'm kind only to get a payback, it's no longer kindness by definition. So that which is inherently valued by all human beings. The world was virtuous, there would be no poverty, no war, everybody be well educated, we'd get along. So it's the best we can imagine. All right. But we've identified a lot of those virtues, and there's no such thing as a comprehensive list. I mean, every time I see a list of virtues, there's some other list that's almost orthogonal or independent of that. So I measure, I don't know, a dozen or so virtuous actions in organizations. And that has led me to these findings. So virtuousness, much more succinctly, virtuousness is a package of virtuous actions implemented by becoming part of the fabric and the routine of an organization. So virtuous organizations score high on the measures of virtuous behaviors.
Right. Well, and what I love, and again, and it's so wonderfully articulated in the book, is that, and I feel when we chat, it's like you're a walking library of research, which I love because I love it myself. And what I think is so important and really appreciated about the book, Kim, was that, and then there are practices. So, right, okay, so, how can I express gratitude as an individual, as a leader? And you highlight, and there's fantastic detail, and there's so many great examples. There are more questions coming in and have come in, so I'm really excited. So thank you, and Tara said that's an amazing answer. Appreciate it so much. So Andrew was shocked by the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Really happy you mentioned it. So was curious about why do organizations keep using these interventions, and what can we do differently? How do we move? Whereas you say it's such a critical issue, gets a lot of an important attention. So what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in general, this message about positive practices, virtuousness, is still labeled soupy, syrupy, substanceless, and so on. It's grandmother's advice. It's okay. I mean, when you're around the campfire and you're singing Kumbaya, it sounds like that to me, Cameron. A little more substantive is, identifying you and you and you and you. You come to the group, and now we've got a representation. So I think it's just partly the stereotype we all have about virtuousness. Excuse me. And my approach, there's a long menu of practices, as you know, Craig, and the best way to help identify which are most appropriate is to find out what the major issue is in an organization. I mean, if you're hungry for beef, you order beef, or as opposed to chicken, that kind of thing. But I think that the easiest way to address diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's the most commonly cited way in the public press and so on, is you got to have a representative. I got to have a minority. I've got to have an underprivileged representative in my team. And I'm not saying, by the way, that that's a wrong thing to do. It probably is. I mean, in some cases, this meta-analysis has found out it didn't help, and in some cases got worse. But I think in most instances, I wouldn't avoid that. I wouldn't avoid training. But those in the absence of getting really serious about virtuous practices, I mean, seriously creating compassion in an organization. I need to tell you another study, sorry. So one of the things that we've discovered is that helping people contribute to another human being is actually a better motivator, creates more satisfaction, and fosters better performance than recognizing or rewarding them. That is, contribution or generosity, whatever word we want to use, contribution trumps achievement in terms of its impact on behavior and performance. I'm going to give you two studies really quick. One of these studies was done by a colleague here at the University of Michigan. She took entering freshmen, 18, 19-year-old students. She asked them to identify their goals for the year. Now, everyone has lots of goals, but she categorized the goals into two types. One type was called achievement goals. I want to get good grades, I want to make the team, I want a girlfriend, I want to be popular. The other kind of goal was called contribution goals. I want to make a difference. I want to have something get better because of what I've done. So everybody has both types of goals, but some are dominated by one, some are dominated by the other. So she put people in two groups, depending on which type of goal was dominant for them. And the study was she simply followed these students for 1 year, measuring, for example, how well they got along with their roommates, how many times they got elected to a club office or something, social factors, how many minor physiological symptoms they experienced, got the cold, got flu, missed class, and so on, physical factors, what their grade point average was at the end of each semester, what their test scores were, so cognitive, academic factors. On every single dimension, contribution goals trumped achievement goals in terms of predicting performance of these students. And that's confirmed by another study of multiple sclerosis patients, MS patients. Half of these people were assigned to receive a phone call once a week, having somebody express love, support, and concern. The other half of these people were assigned to place a phone call once a week to somebody else expressing love, support, and concern. 2 years later, they measured things like well-being, physical activity, self-efficacy, hope, depression, and so on. 8-fold difference. Those people who placed the phone call were 8 times healthier than those who received the phone call. That is, the contribution people make is a better predictor of performance of well-being than reward. Now, most organizations don't measure, don't monitor, don't even care about contribution. I mean, if you do well, I give you a financial reward, I put your picture on the wall, I give you a better parking space or something, give you stuff. But savvy organizations that I know also give people an opportunity to contribute. I'm going to give you a couple of studies. I'm going on too long, Craig. But for example, Craig does especially well. He's extraordinary, he's spectacular. So one of the things I do for him is I say, Craig, you're so outstanding. What we want you to do is to teach Elmer or Evelyn, because they need to be as good as you are. We really need them, but we've got to have you mentor, teach, coach them. As it turns out, that's a better incentive for Craig than having me give him an extra, $500 in his paycheck or something. Anyway, I won't go on and on with studies. There are several studies that show that that's the case and that organizations can do it, and really savvy organizations do, give people a chance to contribute. So institutionalizing generosity matters.
Well, and what I love, several things. Appreciate the evidence-based nature of what you discussed, Kim. And then within each of those studies that you highlight, and this is what I really like, I love it, is that, well, just that study, the study you just cited, hey, well, how can we create training, mentoring opportunities so that we can facilitate people? It's the findings that are incredibly thought-provoking and powerful, and then at the same time, there's a pathway to execution, which I love. And one other thing I want to acknowledge you for in terms of, I just love how you bring in research from different disciplines. So it's something whereby, because it just demonstrates the generalizability. And so despite we're talking about how do we apply it within organizations, I think it's really powerful for us as human beings around, well, these kinds of practices translate in all different facets of our lives. So thank you for that. I have another question. This is
Great, great.
from Adam. So Adam was curious and really appreciate the conversation around positively energizing leadership and your comments around how it impacts performance. I'm just, part of what I'm reconciling is, what about when there are performance challenges? Like, how do we, so how does that facilitate? Is it just for one group of high potential, or how do we? So he'd love to hear your take on that.
Great. Well, it's always the case that we face difficulty. There's some really good research done by the Gallup organization. They were the sort of organization that made the term engagement popular. There's 12 questions, Q12, which is a major predictor of engagement. In fact, and they even define engagement as a basis of high scores on these Q12. Excuse me. And of course, you have to pay attention to people who are not engaged, who are struggling, who and there's lots of mistakes. But in the Gallup research, they found some interesting things. One of them is managers who spend more time with their strongest performers versus their weakest performers, or those who are making mistakes, get double the productivity. Now, that doesn't mean you can ignore the mistakes, but think of the analogy of a basketball team. I mean, you probably want to spend most of your time with the starters. You can't ignore the guys on the bench. You absolutely have to have, or gals on the bench. You have to have some time with them. But most of your time, especially your quality time, better be with the people who are going to bring home the wins. That's what Gallup has said. Another is giving people a chance to do what they do best every day, 1.5 times the productivity. So that doesn't mean ignoring the problems. We have to focus on problems, but we get consumed, all of us in leadership roles. You walk in and there's a bunch of ideas, a bunch of issues on your desk. The problems get our priority, and they have to get some attention. But boy, the research is very clear, and is primarily started by Gallup, although it's not, there are many others. Started from the Gallup organization saying, pay attention to the strong ones. Now, there's a technique or a tool that helps with that. Let me just describe it to practice.
Okay.
So one of the things we often do in organizations when they say we want to change our culture, we want to improve our performance, and so on and so on. And we, by the way, don't want to take advantage of this positive energy, but we don't even know what that means, I would say. So I'll give you just an example of one intervention in an organization that's the world's largest university consortium. They own 69 universities around the world, 12 regions of the world. They said, we want to become a big positive organization worldwide. So the presidents and chancellors of these universities all came together. We spent 3 days with them talking about positive practices, positive leadership, positive energy, and so on. Part of that event, we asked them to identify the positively energizing people in each of their regions. They identified 46 people worldwide, none of whom were in the senior top executives. They were just a sort of cross-section of this organization, but positively energizing people, people who light up the room, who are life-giving, who elevate other people around them. We brought those 46 people together, trained them, gave them some, the empirical research. Here's the valid case you can make, and here's a whole bunch of options. And then we said, your assignment is to infect the rest of the organization with positive energy, positive practices, positive culture. And you have to do it in 90 days. We call it a 90 in 90 challenge. Now, we didn't give these people a prescription. We didn't say you have to do these things in order. We simply said, now you have the menu, you have a sense of what can be done, and your positive energizers infect the rest of the organization, at least 90% of the rest of the organization. Infect means that a person can explain him or herself what positive practices are, what a positive, virtuous organization is. They know it well enough to illustrate it and find examples. And they've attempted a 1% improvement themselves, just a small little incremental improvement. 90 days later, 96% of 135,000 people had been infected. And it was among the most inspiring things you can imagine. They just, on their own, nobody was guiding them. These positive energizers just revolutionized that organization. So of course I have to pay attention to problems. But if I can unleash that positive energy, if I can unleash the positive leaders, don't have to be at the top. In fact, the correlation between hierarchical level, title, and positive energy is very low. I mean, lots of people throughout the organization who don't have title, but who give life to the system. I'll stop talking.
No, I love it. And again, got so many comments of thank you. This is awesome, really interesting. And what I love as well in terms of how you framed it, Kim, was about, okay, well, it's not to say to ignore problems and issues. It's like it's being mindful about where we allocate time. So we have time is an invaluable and limited resource.
That's
so
right.
Then we have to make a decision, and so then we want to make more informed decisions about. And if the goal is, hey, where do we maximize the value we get from the time investment? So I love that framing. I have another question. So this is from Steve, and Steve said, love this discussion around positively energizing leaders. I'm assuming there are positively de-energizing leaders.
Yes.
So, how do we identify them, or how do we deal with them? What do we do?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and there are several answers to that. But let me start in this place. I had a CEO of an organization. It's a big international retail organization headquartered in New York. Just took over, and he said, called me up and said, I know about this positive energy, or at least I've read about this positive energy stuff, and I need to know who my positive energizers are. So can you help me? I said, sure. So the most accurate way to get that data is to do a network analysis. Now I need to take a side trip for a minute. The normal way we identify leaders is look at an organization chart. The person in the top box is obviously the leader. Well, there's some other options. One of them is to do an influence network in your organization. Who influences whom? Who is influenced by whom? Now, as it turns out, the research is clear. If you're at the hub or center of an influence network, your performance is higher, as is the unit you manage. No surprise. If you can influence people, everybody follows you, and so on, you're likely to be identified as a leader. All right, another option is information networks. Who gives information to whom? Who gets information from whom? And again, the research is clear. If you're at the hub of an information network, your performance is higher, as is the unit you manage. All right. What we've discovered is a network that trumps both of those two is an energy network. Who energizes whom? Who is energized by whom? And as it turns out, your position in the energy network is 4 times more important in predicting performance than your position in the influence network or the information network. So creating an influence network is really very helpful. And this guy knew that. He said, I need to know who my positive energizers are. So the best way to do that is to simply, in this group of 40, we simply send out a list of the group of 40 and ask every person to simply answer a question with relation to every other person. So when I interact with Craig, what happens to my energy? So I'm measuring relational energy. We'll probably need to talk more about that in a minute. What happens in the relationship? Am I elevated? Is Craig uplifting? Is he life-giving? Or is he exhausting, depleting, just sucks the life right out of me? In which case he's a de-energizer. So we can just use a Likert scale, 1 to 7. I would rate Craig a 1 if he's very de-energizing. 2, 3, 4, neither. 5, 6, 7, very positively energizing. So we said, all right, all these other 39 people need to rate every single person in the top management group, just in terms of relational energy. Well, within an hour, I had a couple of people call him up and said, look, I'm happy to do this, but it's got to be anonymous. See, I don't want Craig to know how I'm rating him. I'll rate him, but I don't want him to know. Well, the trouble is you can't draw a network map when you don't know where the person who's rating and the person who's being rated is. There's no way to do that. So we created, instead of that, what I refer to as a bubble chart. We simply took everybody who was rated 6s and 7s. That is, of the 39 people, say 30 of them said Craig is a positively energizer. He's got a score of 6 or 7. It's a big bubble, 30 nominations. Or if only 2 people say Craig is a positive energizer, he's got a small bubble. So we just created a bubble chart of this 39 people. We also had how many people rate Craig a de-energizer, a 1 or a 2. So if 13 people rate you as a de-energizer, it's a big de-energizing bubble versus small or 0. Why we created that, we gave the data to the CEO. He's the one that wanted to know, so he knew the names. But to keep it confidential, then nobody knew anybody else's scores, but they got their own scores. So I know that I got X number of people rating me 6 or 7, and X number of people rating me 1 and 2. And then we coached people if they wanted help in terms of how do you foster more positive energy. So you can identify positively energizing people quite easily in your organization. The easiest way is to simply, in your department or in your unit, I do this in class in universities often. And in class in person, I simply say, I want you to take a piece of paper and write down the names of 2 people who are the most positively energizing people in the class. I don't need your name, I just need the names of 2 people, or 3 people, or 4 people. Then I simply tally them up, and I get a sense of, holy cow, Craig has got, out of the 30 people in this classroom, 20 of them think he's a positively energizing person. It's just a bubble chart, but I get a sense of who those people are and who I can count on to infect the rest of the organization. And then with regard to the de-energizing folks, help, assistance, encouragement is often very helpful. See, I don't know very many people who wake up every morning trying to offend somebody else, try to drag somebody else down. There's some people, I suppose. But for the most part, if you give them feedback, the kind of feedback that uplifts and elevates them and the relationship, then it's often very effective. And that's another discussion. I'll stop.
No, again, awesome. Got lots of comments. Thank you. Really great. And time has flown. We've got about 10 minutes, even less than 10 minutes left. So the questions have been fast and furious. Someone did, Sam said, I'm really happy, Kim, that you wanted to talk about positive relational energy and relational energy. Can you share that more? So that may be,
yes.
Please keep giving your questions, but we're getting near the end. So
great. Yes.
Relational energy.
I'll be more succinct. So there are several kinds of energy. One is called physical energy, which when I use it, it diminishes. If I run a marathon, I can't do it again. I get exhausted. Mental energy is the same. When I use it, I write a paper, I write a research report, I do an RFP. I mean, I'm exhausted. I need recovery time. Emotional energy is the same. I get an intense interaction, intense debate, or even I go to a ball game and scream and holler. I'm exhausted. The only kind of energy that elevates with use is relational energy. When do you get exhausted by being around a person with whom you have a loving, supportive relationship? That's renewing. I mean, when I get exhausted, in fact, I'll try to find my wife, my children, who uplift and elevate me. So relational energy is self-perpetuating. All right. The way you measure relational energy is on the basis of what happens in the relationship. It's the energy that's transferred between 2 people. It's not, am I exhausted? It's not, whatever. Now, it's important to know, of course, that none of these sources of energy acts independently. I mean, most of the time, if I'm chasing children around, small children around, physical energy, maybe relational energy if they're doing the wrong thing. But, I finally settle them down at night, read them a story, and relational energy just makes up for all the rest of those. So relational energy is the kind of energy that happens between between two people. So when we get positive energizers, we know that they're uplifting for for those people around them. In fact, one final thing, Craig. One of the major findings is positively energizing people affect the performance of those around them. That is, other people's performance will go up the more they interact with a positively energizing person. And there's a lot of examples of that.
That's so awesome, and I love that in terms of, hey, it not just benefits me, it benefits ourselves when we engage in positively energizing leadership and behaviors, and then also it positively benefits those around us. So again, as you say, the vast majority, I agree, that I know don't set out and say, hey, how do I upset the apple cart today?
Yeah.
And I think that's just such a powerful way in which to be able to approach it. So we've got one more. I probably can get this question in, I think, because I love it and I know your answers. So I'm glad that Amy asked. She said, my career has been in financial services and in banking organizations. So I'm just wondering, are there certain organizations that are better more attracted to positively, or where it works better than others? So I'm really.
It's a great question. The answer is probably so, but there's one of the studies I liked the best that we did was specifically targeted at financial service organizations. And the reason for that is we said to ourselves, all right, where's the least likely place anybody would take this seriously? We picked financial services. And the reason is, look, if I'm financial services, I got one goal: show me the money. I mean, that's the whole point of our whole industry. If I'm on Wall Street and I got $100 million invested in a portfolio, I got to know if it's going up or down. I mean, that's what I track, for heaven's sake, in 15 minutes, for heaven's sake. So we picked 40 firms, expose them to these positive practices, virtuous culture, abundance culture, and so on. And then we followed them for 2 years, measuring two things. We've got time one, here's how your performance is. Then at the end of 1 year and at the end of 2 years, so we got performance. And then we also measured the extent to which they were implementing positive practices and the extent to which their scores on the dimensions that we measure across these various virtuous activities, positive practices, and so on, the extent to which the behaviors of the organization were changing and improving. As it turns out, we could account for almost 50% of the improvement in financial performance if only we knew one measure, and that is, are you getting better or worse in terms of in terms of positive practices, virtuous practices? I mean, I don't know. Do you know anything that predicts Wall Street performance by 50%? It's actually 45%. I'm overestimating. It's the R square. That's a statistic that's interpreted as the amount of variance accounted for is 0.45, 45% of financial performance in financial services organizations was due to improvement in positive performance. It was so dramatic that it's almost unbelievable, but that happens in other organizations as well. And we were studying organizations that were downsizing. The assumption is everything's going to go south. Same kind of thing. We intervened in these organizations across 16 industries, because the question is there one industry that's different than another? Healthcare, manufacturing, military, federal government, intelligence agencies, education organizations, and so on. No differences in those industries. Those that got better in positive practices did better on the outcomes they selected. So I'm not sure that there are industrial differences. Now, that said, one other caveat. This whole field of study is only 20 years old or so. So there are far more questions to be asked than there are answers to be given. I mean, nobody's really done a really good study of industry differences or continent differences or timeframes. How long does it take to unfold, and so on? I mean, there's a whole bunch of questions, but maybe some of you can do that work.
Well, and what I love, and thank you, I've got lots of comments, and thank you for that. And what I love as well, again, and it's such a wonderful orientation where you say, hey, so here's the data, there are different streams, and then putting it in a broader context. So we're right at the end of our time. And so just before I throw it to you, Kim, for a final comment, just want to let people know that next week I have Scott Tessier. So he's the CEO of the Canada, Newfoundland, and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board. He's going to be the next guest. So next Thursday afternoon, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to sign up for that, another great guest, wonderful insights in terms of how to be a CEO, and I would love to see you again next week. Kim, I have to say, as I mentioned, multiple comments. Here's one from Emmanuel who said, thank you so much for being so inspiring. You are such a breath of fresh air and bringing such positive energy and optimism at a very needed time. So there were lots of comments like that, but you know, and I echo that. So Kim, in the few moments that we have remaining, any final comments, thoughts, reflections that you would encourage people who took time to join us today? This is just awesome for me. So thanks again.
Well, my final comment is a great big thank you to you, Craig. You're making such a difference in the world, such a difference not only in the people who listen, but the people who get a chance to participate. So thanks for the opportunity for me. It's I learn a lot from you. I'm inspired by you, and it's just an honor. It's a privilege. So thanks for the impact, and thanks for the chance for me to be involved in it.
Oh, well, the pleasure's all mine. It's always such a joy to chat with you, and I love the evidence-based insights. I got lots of comments as well about thanks for sharing the science behind your practices and behind the key leadership concepts, and I agree wholeheartedly. And I would encourage everybody to go get the book, check it out. So many great practices, evidence-based, and Kim shares lots of other studies in there that enrich the practices that we discussed this afternoon. So thank you to everybody again for taking the time this afternoon. And again, Kim, as our special guest, just so much learning that people have. And to me, it's just such a privilege to know you, and appreciate you constantly giving of yourself to share your insights with people. And lots of, here we go, absolutely wonderful. So many comments coming in. So thank you to everybody. This has been a positively energizing session, and can't wait to see you again, hopefully next week. Bye, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.